Welcome back to Here's the Deal. I'm Laura Barnes with Leadership Beyond Sport, and today we have an awesome guest on our pod chunk. It is Dalia Regev, and she is going to be sharing with us some cool tips and tricks and information about networking as a young adult. So I will bring Dalia in, and we are going to get to it. Hey, Dalia, welcome.
Hi, Laura. It's good to be here. Thank
Thanks
you.
thanks so much for joining us today. So let's just jump right in. Tell me a little bit about your background. Obviously, we know your name, and it's right there at the bottom, so we're cool there. But tell me a little bit about your kind of college experience, networking in college, and then post college. What was that like for you?
Sure. So I received my undergraduate degree at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and it was a sport management degree. And what was really neat about the program, Laura, is that it was housed in the College of Business. So regardless of how I felt about networking, it was going to be baked into everything we did because it was under the business umbrella, which I thought was great. Obviously, you have to be proactive and kind of put yourself out there yourself, but it gave us some good jumping off points in terms of networking events with sports professionals, business professionals. We had a lot of opportunities from freshman year to senior year, and then we also had required volunteer hours as well as a couple internships that we needed to complete before we could graduate within the program, the sport management program. So whether it was guest speakers in the classroom that our professors would bring in, those were opportunities to follow up and have conversations outside of the talk that they came into. And then your internships, whether it be your coworkers, your co-interns, or your boss, whatever that looks like, that was definitely a more realistic kind of interaction versus just a simulated networking night. And
Mhm.
then, just networking on my own has always been something that I'm interested in. So I carried that with me all throughout my undergraduate career. And then I received my master's last year, master's in business administration with a sport management emphasis. You can sense a theme here, sports all the way. And even more so, grad school is very much more applied than undergrad. Both are equally great, but you really get to put what you learned into practice. So that offered a lot more opportunity for networking as well.
Awesome. And you kind of mentioned this. So it sounds like you always had a little bit of a penchant for networking. Were you always the outgoing, bubbly, like let's meet everyone kind of person, or was it a struggle for you when you first were like, I'm gonna start networking?
Well, I would start off by saying I'm very fortunate because I've always had an interest in learning from others. I grew up with entrepreneurial parents who worked most of our childhood in the home. So those interactions that they had with their clients, as well as when they would introduce my brother and me to their clients, it was kind of all hands on deck all the time, which I know I didn't appreciate at the time because I was 8 or whatever, but having those natural interactions in your own home where you stick out your hand and say, "Hey, my name's Dalia. It's nice to meet you." Yeah, you're not doing an elevator pitch when you're 8, but that really gives you the opportunity to get a lot of reps. So that I think helped. I also have a twin brother, and it's just the two of us. So he's always been around as someone my age who I've always been able to interact with, which I think is a pretty neat cheat code that not everyone has. And yeah, I've just always really enjoyed learning from others, whether they're in my chosen industry or not. So I guess I'm fortunate because I don't, of course, I always get nervous, well, maybe not always, but I get nervous from time to time when networking or when the moment's pretty big with a big decision maker, but I've never really been paralyzed by it. So I feel fortunate.
Awesome. And talk a little bit about your process. Again, obviously, we're talking about owning your process. So, what has been your process when it comes to networking? Whether it's your initial approach, when you're in a networking situation, what is the Dahlia process? We're
The
going to straighten
Dahlia,
our out, by the way.
you better. I mean, I don't know how many Dahlias you know, but I'd like to think I'm the only one. So you better believe it better be trademarked.
As of right now, you are, but with all of your networking tips, I don't know. I might meet a few more Dahlias. You never know.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I think my process is, very much centered around. This is going to sound backwards, but I'll explain. Being selfish in the purpose for the call, but being selfless and humble while you're in the call. And what I mean by that is you should absolutely have an idea of what you want to get out of the conversation, even if it means, okay, I'm getting on with Laura, and that means I'm going to ask her this list of questions that I've prepared, and that's really it, and thank them for their time, hang up, that's the end of the story. That's fine, but that's still a plan. And you wouldn't be scheduling these calls or pursuing these conversations if you didn't want to get something out of it. So I think there's a healthy selfish nature that on the surface may seem a little backwards, but definitely have that intention going into it. And then once it's game time and you're on that call or you're in that conversation, make it about them. They're the one with the expertise, whether it's someone who's a year older than you are, 10 years older than you are, 20 years, it doesn't matter. You're obviously wanting that knowledge, but make it about them and practice gratitude for not only they're giving you their time, but most of them are going to give you some pretty good tips. So really just soak that in. And I'm a notes person. I have paper still that I use. So I keep them in a nice little notebook that I can have as kind of a keepsake to look back on after the fact. And then always follow up afterwards.
Awesome. And I'm gonna say one thing to kind of add on to that. Like, they don't necessarily have to be older than you, because I know I'm older than you and I have learned a ton from our interaction. So sometimes you're networking with people younger than you. Doesn't mean that there isn't wisdom in people younger than you. I was gonna say under your age. That doesn't make sense.
Under my age. I'm tall, so maybe it's under my age. I don't know.
I like it. We'll figure that one
You're
out.
100%. You're 100% right, though. You can learn something from anyone as long as you have an open mind. So I completely agree with that.
Definitely. And then the follow-up piece, like, that's obviously so huge. And I know you and I have talked about this in other conversations, that in some cases, that's the biggest mistake that people make when they network, is they go into it, they have a plan, they get all their questions answered, they walk away from the conversation, and then 2 years later, they're like, oh, I want to work at that company, but I haven't talked to that person in 2 years. So it's sort of awkward. So what's your process? I think I even get caught up on that. Like, what's the best way, in your opinion, to follow up with someone? How do you keep that relationship going without it seeming like cheesy and smarmy and like you're always looking for something?
Sure. It's a fine balance, and it's something that I'm continuously evolving with my process as well. So don't take my word for it that I'm the expert by any means. But what I like to do is at the end of, say it's a longer engagement, like an internship, or you're going to be volunteering once a week for 3 months in school or over the summer, whatever it may be. I tend to, when there's really an opportunity to foster a relationship and get to know that person, whether you hit it off with them or not, they're part of your daily routine, whatever that looks like, and you depend on them and they you. So it's very much a mutual, kind of relationship. I always go with a handwritten note, and I always joke with people, I'm a lefty, and anyone who's a lefty knows that once you write, the whole letter is on your, your hand and your forearm, and it starts to cramp, and it looks like you're, a 2-year-old with Crayola all over you. But I think that for those longer term relationships, even if they're not your favorite person in the world, that'll really make a difference. I'm not saying you need to make the effort to mail a handwritten note after every phone call, because ideally you'll be doing lots of these phone calls, and I don't think that's exactly necessary. But for those longer interactions, I would say go the extra mile. And also, if someone said something or multiple things or left you with an idea of how to move forward in your pursuits, and it really meant something to you, then go that extra mile. Because a lot of people will help you in this industry, but a lot of people have one conversation with Dalia or Laura and they never hear from them again, like you said. So you can never go wrong with any way you follow up, whether it be LinkedIn message or email or call, leave a voicemail, handwritten note. But to the extent that you got something out of the conversation, if it was a lot, then I'd say go the extra mile. Otherwise, do a LinkedIn message. And to that end, when you're trying to keep the relationship going, if you see something and the person works for the Columbus Crew, the MLS team in Ohio, and you see, oh, they just got a naming rights deal for their jersey, or, fan attendance is at an all-time high or something like that, just shoot it over to them on LinkedIn or an email and say, hey, Clay, I was thinking about you. How are things at the club? Or, hey, it's been a while. If you want to, invite yourself to another call. No one's ever going to say, no, I don't want to talk about my knowledge.
Yep, that is key number one.
And I don't mean that in a bad way, but no one's ever, people are going to be flattered, right? So to the extent that you want to, just elevate it to how you feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got from a mentor of mine was people love talking about themselves because it's the topic they know the best.
That's
So
right.
they like if you can get somebody talking about themselves, like we try to keep these pod chunks to 20 minutes. If I wanted to just be like, Dalia, tell me your life story, we could be here for hours and it would be amazing. I know.
Well, thank you. Well, then I'd want to hear all about your life stories. We'd be here double as forever. So
we would, and it would also be fantastic. I'd be down for that. So that's not going to be a pod chunk though. That's going to be a pod marathon. I think that's the next
pod
thing.
Marathon.
Pod
Tune
marathon.
In. We'll give you the details.
A podathon. That might be the next thing.
I like that.
So obviously networking is like, it can be a bear sometimes. Sometimes you get a dud, you reach out to someone, you have a conversation and you're like, wow, you just sucked all of the energy straight out of my soul and I need a nap. I'm not asking you to name names. I won't name names either. But what keeps you motivated to keep having those conversations when maybe you're having those negative conversations or somebody's telling you just like not great things about the industry or the answers you're getting aren't really uplifting and motivating? What keeps you motivated to continue reaching out to new people and having those conversations?
Well, I am a self-diagnosed nerd and perpetual learner. So I never, I don't want to sound all high and mighty about it. Please believe me, that's not it. But I always kind of have that intrinsic drive to like, okay, who can I, get on a phone call with next? That's just kind of how I'm wired. But that being said, the more you put yourself out there, the more apt you're going to have kind of those dud conversations. And so I've gotten down about that. I'm like, well, why didn't they like me? Why did I not get anything, super impactful from this? Why did I just feel like it was, a tennis match? Like I said something and then served it back to them and then they served it back to me. And it was just kind of like, bleh. The big thing for me, Laura, is, and I still have issues with this, it's a work in progress, is giving yourself permission and understanding that you're not going to hit it off with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not. And it doesn't matter if they're the best meaning person, the most well-meaning person, or the most successful person, or the most accessible person, is willing to take your call like that. Everyone's different. And so even though on paper it looks like, oh man, I'm going to talk to the director of partnership marketing for the Miami Heat. This is amazing. Like, they're just a human, just like you. So I say, don't make too big of a deal out of it going into it and after the call. And then second of all, just say, hey, that's a situation where I would shoot them a quick LinkedIn message after the fact, the day after, say, hey, Laura, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Hope we can keep the lines of communication open. If I have any questions that pop up, most likely they're going to say, yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure. Message me anytime. And then, it kind of drops off. I mean, they're not dumb either. Like they're going to understand and, just understand that you don't need to put this monumental pressure on yourself to click with anyone because that's never going to happen. And second of all, just try to, use whatever calls you've been on to maybe redirect your search. Maybe it wasn't the right person for you to be talking to. Maybe you want to try speaking to a different department or a different league. Just use the past experiences to kind of inform what your next steps with networking are.
Yeah, I think
that was a ramble. That was a ramble.
It's all right. It was a good ramble. It was a purposeful ramble. And I think it's great advice. I think a lot of young adults use networking because essentially what we're talking about is like informational interviews, right? Like having these conversations with people to learn more about what they do in their day-to-day life, what they do in their job, to determine if it's something you might want to do. And let's say you do talk to somebody in marketing and you're like, oh my God, I want to do, like, I'm majoring in marketing. This is what I want to do. And they don't make it sound as cool as you think it is. There are thousands of other people who work in marketing for different companies, who had a different commute to work that day, who didn't spill coffee on themselves in their first meeting, right? Like you have no idea what happened to that person before they got on that call with you that might have influenced how they responded or what they said. So they might be having a fight with their boss. They might be in negotiation battles over their next contract. There might be a deal that just went south. Like you have no idea. So if you're really interested in a specific area, to just kind of tie into what you were saying, like don't let one person, even if they are really high up, be the end all be all about whether or not you're going to pursue that industry. Like you can go find 5 more people in that same environment or in that same space, even in that same company, to get a different perspective on how it might be. So I think that's just another way to say, like, don't let yourself get discouraged. And again, not everybody's word is gospel. So remembering that they all have different experiences.
I was just going to say, to follow up on your point, don't take one person's word as gospel. I swear, that's what I was thinking, because, look, you put yourself out there with all these different conversations. You don't know how it's going to end up beforehand. You certainly know how it happened after the fact. And the best part is you're in control of what you take away from it. You're going to get this influx of information and trim away the fat. Take what you want, discard the rest.
Yeah.
Follow up, thank them for your time, and move on. Now, that ain't easy sometimes, like I fell into a trap a lot, especially early on of, oh my gosh, I was just writing down every single thing he said, and she just said so many amazing things, and I have to internalize every single one of them. And I'm like, first of all, no. I mean, that's not how you would internalize a call from a friend. You're not gonna, write a mental transcript of what you just heard for the last 20 minutes. Just take what you want, trim the fat, and give yourself permission. Again, A, you're not going to click with everyone, and B, you don't need to internalize everything. You get to choose, which is really exciting and empowering when you really get that discipline of, hey, okay, I can let this stuff go.
Yeah. And also, as you were talking, when you were giving the previous answer, I think that like this comes up for me a lot when it comes to work, but networking is a lot like dating. You're not going to hit it off with everyone on your first date. You're not going to want a second date with everyone you go out with, but it's always like, but nobody likes being ghosted. So to your point of like, just send the thank you. And like you said, like, they're not stupid. They know that it didn't go well either. But like, thanks for your time. It was really a pleasure meeting you. Hopefully our paths cross again in the future. Like that's completely fine. And it leaves no expectation of, also, I want you to hire me for a job, or, oh yeah, you're going to ask me out on another date. Like there's no expectation at that point. So keeping that in mind too, I think can make it a little bit more, I almost want to say whimsical, that it can be a little bit more playful. Like, all right, like we're just feeling each other out right now. We're just getting to know each other and deciding if we want to kick it up a notch and go for dinner instead of coffee next time. So that, yeah, I think that highlights your point as well.
100%. Well, it's, whether you want to be in sales or marketing or social media or what have you, there's always going to be that element of you have to put your best foot forward and advocate for yourself, put your brand out there, sell yourself, whether that's an elevator pitch at a cocktail party or one of these conversations. I mean, I wouldn't have come on to this pod chunk if I didn't feel like I hit it off with you. And conversely, you wouldn't have asked me to come on if there wasn't some kind of connection. So, there's an element of selling yourself by being authentic. Don't get me wrong. But understanding that that'll jive with certain people, it won't with others.
Yeah.
But always just be mindful of that when you're deciding, do I want to go on another date with this person? Maybe not, and that's okay. There are other fish in the sea, right?
Absolutely. There's even a dating app that highlights that, how there are plenty of them. Not to name names. All right. So let's jump into our kind of wrap up. And I would love if you could give us 2 to 3 tips that you would recommend to any young adults who are hesitant about networking, don't really know how to own their own process, are sort of feeling like, I don't know if networking is for me, but people keep saying I have to do it. So what is your first tip that you would offer to somebody in that situation?
I think the first tip, honestly, Laura, is you can't do it wrong. You really can't. I mean, you're not going to get on one of these calls or, do an informational interview and just trash the person. I mean, you're not going to you're going to be on your best behavior. You're going to, make sure that, you're nice to them, they're nice to you, and that it's a conversation. I talked about earlier how there's some examples of it's like a really lame tennis match where it's just, I say something and then they say something. Like, do your best to make it a flowing conversation, but you're never going to say anything that is so outrageous where A, they hang up, or B, you know, there's something you can not come back from. Like, if you're in college or a young adult, maybe you might want some tutelage on how to, you know, frame certain things or approach certain conversations, but you're not going to do anything wrong. So just take that pressure off you first and foremost.
Yeah, as long as you don't mention anything super negative that's going on in their life that's public knowledge, like as long as you stay away from the key ones, right? So
Yeah, maybe do a little research before to avoid the hot topics. Absolutely.
exactly. All right, and what is tip number 2?
Tip number 2 is really that effort is rewarded. You know, you can really think of it, the way I think of it is this quote. I think it's Seneca or some kind of old Greek dude or something. I don't remember exactly.
Greek
Someone who
dudes
was
say a
alive.
lot of cool stuff, so probably.
Oh, they do. Oh, they absolutely do, and that's why they have sculptures and everything of them. And not us, you know, because we're learning from them. But you know, he says luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and I live by that. You know, I think of Titanic when I hear that quote, not because of the ship going down. Okay, well, of course, it's not bleak, but when they're at the dinner table and you know, Cal is trying to really, you know, just kind of muscle his way around Jack because he's this third class guy at this first class table. And, you know, Jack says at the end of the conversation, you know, I like to make my own luck. I like to, you know, put myself in a position wherever the world takes me to make the best of it. That's what I always think of. And not to mention that Cal was, you know, a mean guy and a villain in the movie. But what Jack was saying is right. You know, you make your own luck. And if you prepare enough, just like on game day, if you're in sports, you know, your training will take over and you'll know what to do. So create your own luck, create your own opportunities, and prepare accordingly.
Absolutely. And that actually ties perfectly into tip number 3. So what is tip number 3 for us today?
Tip is prepare, prepare, prepare. Honestly, you know, it may seem silly. I know a lot of career centers in school have, you know, these mock interview opportunities. Like, have a conversation with a friend where you're acting as the chief marketing, whatever you want to speak to, and maybe switch roles. You know, if you want to just kind of act out what these conversations look like, then do that. Make sure you always have a list of a few questions that you want to lead with, so it shows that, you know, you're not just showing up to this call because, oh yeah, shoot, it's on my calendar and I kind of forgot about it. You know, you want to seem like a professional. And also, if you can throw in a question or two about them personally and their background, stalk them on LinkedIn and make them feel like it's a personalized call. And just be really intentional. Like I said, all the way back at the beginning of the pod chunk, is, you know, start with the end in mind. Be selfish beforehand so you can prepare to get everything you want out of the interaction. And then once it's go time and you're having the conversation, be humble and make it all about them.
Yeah, I love that. And then so kind of to that point, do you a lot of people will say like, "Oh, like when I'm having a networking call or when I'm talking to somebody at my dream company, I should ask for a job at the end." What would you advise on that? Or
That's an interesting one. And I know we're running short on time here, so I'll try to make it fast. But it's funny because one of my prerequisites for interning in undergrad was you had to do a mock interview with a sports professional. And cover letter, resume, make sure you're ready to go out into the workforce. I ended up doing my mock interview with Bob Bodor, who was at the time the director of membership at USA Fencing. And to his credit, he made it just like a conversation. It was very easygoing and we just hit it off. At that point, I just felt really comfortable with him. He took me around the offices and I got to meet everyone. So, and they were very welcoming. And I had done my research on them as an organization. And I could see myself in, you know, helping them out as an intern, whatever that may look like. So I did shoot my shot. I said, hey, look, Bob, I'm not being presumptuous. I'm good either way, but I like what I'm hearing here. You know, as I referenced earlier, I've looked into your culture, the values, what you guys are all about. I don't know if there are any opportunities out there to intern for the next semester, but would love to be kept in mind if anything should pop up. Just let me know. And I guess I was fortunate because they created an internship for me. I don't know if that's always going to be the case, because internships are different from jobs. It might be a different scale, but I think it's really I would err on the side of no, like don't do that, just because if you don't say it, then you won't mess it up, with how you present it. But, I wouldn't say never either.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think positioning it as if there are ever opportunities to get more involved, I would love to be considered is a completely different ask than like, hey, do you have any jobs that I could apply for? Or hey,
Yeah.
I saw that there's a director position available and I'm 19. I'm totally ready for that, right?
Yeah, I'm a shoo-in, right?
But yeah, I think that it's okay to say to highlight that you are interested, that you are willing to do the work. And like, I think what you said is perfect. Like, if there's an opportunity to get involved with your organization or to work for you, I would love to be considered. And then I think that just sort of puts it on them of like, okay, like it's a simple, like, all right, good to know. Like, we may or may not, but good to know. But I agree with you. I generally say err on the side of don't make that ask. Because you never know how it's going to land. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can, and then that's just you're laying the groundwork for following up in a month, 3 months, 6 months. When you see a job opening that you're interested in and that you're qualified for, then you have built a little bit of a track record. So you're not coming in cold. So it is an opportunity to kind of lay that groundwork for moving on. And, when I say err on the side of no, you're going to get to a point where you have enough of these conversations where you're going to get more and more comfortable about the prospect of asking. You may never ask, but you'll feel it out and kind of sniff out the situation of, is this, you're not going to do that on the first call. Right. I wouldn't recommend doing that. But, more at bats, more exposure, then that comfort level is going to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dalia, this was amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Any final thoughts or comments for me, for our young adults in the audience, anything that you are just dying to say before we wrap up today?
First of all, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love what you're doing with this Leadership Beyond Sport. I think it's really needed. And I think that the biggest piece of advice I would give is something I tell myself on an almost daily basis, which is don't put that much pressure on yourself. It doesn't matter how driven you are. It doesn't matter how amazing, you want to be or you feel you are, whatever that looks like. Just don't put the weight of the world on your shoulders, especially when you're going into networking and you're not super comfortable with it yet. That's the last thing you should do, is put pressure on yourself to get it just right when you're wading into the waters for the first time. So, just take a load off. Like I said at the beginning, you ain't going to do it wrong. You're going to be respectful. You're going to be polite. And more often than not, you're going to come along away with some really good chunks of knowledge and, perspective. So just take that in for all it's worth.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Here's the Deal. Thanks for talking about owning your process and how to be a badass networker in your young adulthood. And we will see you guys on the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura.